Merci beaucoup, Terry. Ça fait tellement plaisir de pouvoir animer cette discussion avec 4 invités de marque. Chrystia Freeland, Mary Ng, Diane Lebouthillier, and Mélanie Joly, you are all very well known to all liberals and quite certainly role models to women and girls right across our country. We know that the pandemic has had a disproportionate impact on women like me who are mothers of young children, women entrepreneurs who are fighting for the survival of their businesses, women working in the hospitality and tourism sectors, which have been so hard hit. And the topic that we are addressing today of how we attack this she-cession we are in is important not only to women, but to all Canadians, because our economic recovery depends on the full participation of women in our economy. Alors, je suis tellement heureuse de vous avoir toutes les 4 pour cette discussion si importante et sans plus tarder, rentrons dans le vif du sujet. Nous entendons souvent dire que la COVID-19 a provoqué une récession pour les femmes ou she-cession en bon français. J'aimerais donc demander à nos panélistes de nous expliquer un peu ce que cela signifie pour vous et dans vos collectivités, de façon vraiment pratico-pratique. Pourquoi est-ce qu'il est si important d'avoir une reprise féministe, intersectionnelle? Peut-être on pourrait commencer avec Mary.
Rachel, thank you so much. And it's terrific to be here with my wonderful colleagues in Chrystia, in Mélanie, and Diane. And this pandemic has been really quite difficult for everyone. But we're here because we're talking about a she-cession. And if I just sort of share the stories across the country that I hear so much in my day-to-day work, it really is, if you think about it, women who are raising their children and trying to keep their companies and their small businesses going. So many of businesses that are in the most highly affected sectors are owned by women. Some of the smallest businesses are also owned by women. And they are particularly impacted as a result of COVID-19. And then if you intersect in there, the racialized businesses or racialized women, women who are new immigrants who have just but started to get their foot into building their small business, they're particularly impacted as a result of COVID-19. So throughout the pandemic, we've had to do many, many things to help support these terrific women entrepreneurs, women-owned businesses, women in general, through the range of supports that we have put together. But this has had a disproportionate impact, this pandemic, on women across the country. But I also sort of say that there is 2 numbers that I often look at being the small business minister. One number is $150 billion, and the second number is a $12 trillion number. And why is that? The investments that we have made well before COVID-19 to help women get that leg up and to create an inclusive economy means that by simply doing one thing, which is adding women to the economy, will yield $150 billion to Canada's economy. And if the world follows suit, it's $12 trillion, the global economy. So do we need to have real strategies to deal with the full participation of women coming out of this she-cession? Absolutely.
Thank you, Mary. I mean, I know that you speak to women entrepreneurs every day and your leadership has been so important. Mélanie, est-ce que tu voulais enchaîner?
Oui, bien, en fait, je pense que le fait simplement qu'on puisse en parler, toutes les femmes ensemble, de ce phénomène qui est la récession pour les femmes, démontre qu'on a une lentille féministe en soi comme gouvernement et que le fait d'identifier le problème va nous amener à des solutions. Because we can't think we're trying to solve an issue if we're actually not trying to identify it. And the fact we're talking about this she-cession helps us and shows how much we're targeted about the issue. Mary referred to entrepreneurs, women entrepreneurs being deeply impacted because they're in the sectors of the economy that are mostly impacted: hospitality, tourism, the service sector. Definitely women staying at home because the kids' school is in virtual mode. We've seen that, we know that, but the issue is now, and that will be the valid question eventually, for sure. What is the world after the pandemic? What it will mean for me and my kids and my parents and my family. And so that's why we need a plan. And that's why the question of childcare is extremely important. On le sait, Rachel, Diane et moi, on vient du Québec. On est fiers du système qui a été bâti au Québec au niveau des garderies. On sait aussi qu'il manque de place en garderie. On sait qu'il y a plusieurs femmes qui voudraient envoyer leurs enfants dans les CPE et malheureusement, ils sont sur des listes d'attente pendant des années et ce qui fait en sorte que ça coûte cher. Et ça ne les aide pas non plus à regagner le marché du travail. C'est le cas au Québec, mais la situation est encore plus exacerbée à l'extérieur du Québec. Donc, je pense que d'avoir un bon plan de match pour la question des garderies, c'est important. L'autre phénomène que l'on voit beaucoup à travers cette pandémie, qui est certainement vraiment un drame, c'est l'augmentation des féminicides. Donc, we've seen an increase in gender-based violence throughout the pandemic. One of the first things that we did during the first lockdown, and I remember it was due to the leadership of our colleague, the Minister of Gender Equality, Mariam Monsef, was really to increase funding for women shelters. We saw a spike in the calls to these shelters at the beginning of the pandemic. The anxiety is high, folks, across the country. You know it, we know it. And that's why we have to show that we're there for women that are going through very, very difficult times right now. La situation des féminicides au Québec a été extrêmement préoccupante. On a décidé de travailler avec le gouvernement du Québec sur cette question-là, d'augmenter le financement aux maisons et aux refuges pour personnes, pour femmes en difficulté. On va continuer de le faire. Et finalement, je pense qu'on peut tous s'inspirer des histoires que l'on entend dans nos familles. Rachel, tu faisais référence au fait que tu es une jeune maman et on le voit dans nos familles. On le voit certainement avec nos amis, avec nos collègues. Et donc, basé sur toutes ces histoires-là, on va vouloir s'inspirer des meilleures idées pour être en mesure justement d'avoir un bon plan de match. Et je suis confiante que notre ministre des Finances aura de bonnes solutions pour nous lors du budget 19 avril prochain.
Ben oui, et ça s'en vient rapidement. Je suis tout à fait d'accord, Mélanie. J'ai moi-même attendu, même au Québec, 3 ans avant d'avoir une place à la garderie. Alors, c'est très important qu'on s'y attaque. Diane, à toi la parole.
Écoutez, moi, je peux vous dire que c'est un sujet que j'ai vraiment à cœur au niveau de tout ce qui concerne les femmes. Et on a vraiment pu constater que la période de la pandémie a été catastrophique pour les femmes partout à travers le Canada. Puis ça a été au niveau mondial. Et je pense que trop longtemps, on a pris pour acquis le travail des femmes. C'est une espèce de non-reconnaissance aussi de toute l'implication des femmes au niveau là, des différents services. Puis pour moi, là, la pandémie, on doit vraiment là, devenir un levier pour pouvoir permettre une reprise économique qui va être inclusive, une reprise économique aussi qui va amener une équité au niveau du plan salarial pour les femmes. Et j'ai un intérêt aussi particulier pour les femmes qui sont en région, les femmes de milieu rural, où pour nous, la reprise économique, parce qu'on a un enjeu démographique qui est important, on a un vieillissement de la population, donc on va avoir besoin pour le développement des milieux ruraux, on va avoir besoin d'immigration, on va avoir besoin d'inclure des gens, on va avoir besoin de diversité en milieu rural et on va avoir besoin aussi de pouvoir accueillir, puis de pouvoir offrir pour pouvoir garder ces femmes-là dans nos milieux. On va avoir besoin de logements, on va avoir besoin de places en garderie. On va avoir besoin aussi d'éducation auprès de nos communautés pour avoir une ouverture à l'autre personne, à ces femmes-là qui vont venir chez nous de d'autres cultures. Puis j'avais l'habitude de dire, moi, là, il n'y a rien de plus beau pour moi qu'une courte pointe. Une courte pointe, ça a toutes sortes de couleurs. Puis c'est ce qui fait là, la beauté de la diversité là, au sein des régions. Donc, moi, peu importe la couleur des gens, peu importe la religion, peu importe l'orientation sexuelle, peu importe l'âge, on va devoir intégrer les femmes handicapées au niveau des femmes autochtones et des femmes qui vont venir là, d'un peu partout pour pouvoir bâtir une économie qui va être forte au niveau de nos régions. Donc, d'avoir des outils pour permettre à ces femmes-là, à nos femmes entrepreneurs, on va avoir besoin de l'Internet, on va avoir besoin de la téléphonie cellulaire, on va avoir besoin de garderies. C'est inconcevable pour moi qu'en 2021, qu'il y ait des femmes qui disent, nous, on doit mettre un frein à notre maternité parce qu'on n'a pas de place en garderie. On ne peut pas retourner au travail parce qu'on n'a pas de place en garderie. Donc, on va devoir travailler tout le monde ensemble, tous les paliers de gouvernement. On va avoir besoin des groupes de femmes, des paliers municipaux, provinciaux, fédéraux. On va avoir besoin des hommes aussi pour pouvoir permettre aux femmes de donner cet espace-là pour qu'on prenne notre place. Donc, comme je vous dis, là, c'est une opportunité, là, la pandémie, pour vraiment pouvoir progresser, puis d'avoir là, un développement qui va être vraiment, comme je disais, inclusif et équitable.
Je suis tout à fait d'accord, Diane. The importance of addressing the She-cession, not only from an urban perspective, but also taking into consideration our rural and remote areas, and also the cultural differences among women, so important. Peut-être pour tourner vers Chrystia, cette semaine, vous avez pris part à plusieurs rencontres internationales virtuelles. Vous l'avez soulevé plus tôt lors de ce congrès. Vous êtes en contact constant avec les ministres des Finances de partout à travers le monde. Comment voyez-vous l'évolution de ce thème sur la scène internationale?
Merci Rachel pour la question. Et je veux commencer en disant à quel niveau je suis d'accord avec Diane. Et Diane, je pense que ce que vous avez dit, c'est que pour bâtir une économie forte, inclusive, on a besoin d'infrastructures. Infrastructures physiques comme accès à Internet et infrastructures sociales comme les garderies. On a besoin de tous les deux aux régions, dans les grandes villes autour de notre pays. And, you know, Rachel, that's a very good question. This past week happens to have been the week of the annual spring meetings of the IMF and the World Bank. And one interesting thing that really struck me at those meetings and in hindsight is we're at this moment in time when some of the key economic jobs in the world are actually being done by women. So the US Secretary of the Treasury for the first time is a woman, Janet Yellen. I was in 5 meetings with her last week. I think I saw her
I think we may have just lost your connection, Chrystia.
Are still a minority in this universe. But just having a few in these key roles is so mutually reinforcing. So at the G20 meeting, there were about more than 40 speakers. I was like around speaker number 20. I was the first person to say the word woman. And I pointed that out. And I said, gentlemen, in all of our countries, women are hit hardest by the COVID recession. And the policies that we put in place need to address that. And what was so nice was then I immediately got a text from Kristalina Georgieva saying bravo and giving me those hand clap emojis. So that was very supportive, very reinforcing. And then on Friday, we have sort of a meeting just of the finance ministers of the Western Hemisphere, our neighborhood. And the first speaker was Secretary Yellen. And she made a point right in her opening remarks in saying a personal priority for her is the full economic inclusion of women and girls and full legal rights for women and girls. And then she said something that Diane has just said that I agree with so strongly. She said, that's because when you do that, the whole economy benefits. And that is so true. And I feel we're kind of at a pivotal moment, certainly in Canada, but I would say even more broadly in the world, when we can really make this case that people are really starting to get it. And I think that that can have a profound impact on economic policy, but probably more importantly, because ultimately, who cares so much about policy? What we care about is our lives. I can think that that can have a profound impact on the prosperity, the well-being of every single Canadian.
Thank you, Chrystia. I hope I'm not overstepping by saying that I think all Liberals are so proud to have you sitting around that table. It is wonderful to see Canada's first female finance minister taking such an active role on this issue internationally and here at home. And I'd like to ask all of our panelists now to walk us through a little bit about what we've done to advance gender equality up until now and what opportunities are emerging during this recovery to further accelerate our efforts. Mélanie, let me start with you.
Merci beaucoup, Rachel. Well, obviously, we all know that the Prime Minister in 2015 appointed its first gender parity cabinet. And I think since that time, we've seen clearly the solutions that we've been able to put forward for Canadians, from the Canada Child Benefit to much more supporting an approach in terms of gender-based violence and helping really many resources hit the ground running to help people having these issues. Also, when we were able to really help in terms of parental leave. But I think we're looking at another step now, which is really what the recovery will look like. Chrystia just talked about it in terms of what can be the policies of the future to help women to participate more in the workforce. What I can say is during the pandemic itself, through the regional development agencies, a lot of the small businesses that were not able to really have access to the big measures such as the wage subsidy and the rent relief, etc. Basically, the businesses falling through the cracks came to see us. And we now know that in many regions, 50% of the support we've given overall was given to women-led businesses. So it shows how much, that lens was important and how much women were able basically to have access to that help to survive, because the entire idea of this program was to make sure that these businesses and these entrepreneurs were able to bridge and get out of the pandemic in order to keep the jobs, the people they were employed in, and also their own job. Si vous me le permettez, ma chère Rachel, en tant que coprésidente de la campagne aussi, j'aimerais aussi m'adresser aux gens qui nous écoutent, parce que là, on parle, dans le fond, de la relance, on parle de la réouverture de l'économie, on essaie de regarder vraiment la lumière au bout du tunnel alors qu'il y a de la vaccination un petit peu partout à travers le pays. Mais le plus important, c'est que dans la prochaine campagne électorale, c'est qu'on ait des femmes qui se présentent pour nous. One of my priorities, along with co-chairing with my fantastic colleague Navdeep Bains, will be to make sure we have more women candidates. We are facing a she-cession. We need more of you. And if you're thinking of running, if you're not sure, it's normal. It takes sometimes 10 times to convince a woman to run. So you're part of the average. We all have different stories to tell. But that being said, please think about it. Take the risk. And we're up for it. We want to help you out. And this will be ultimately a big, big priority of mine because we want to make sure that we have the right team with a lot of women part of it. Merci beaucoup.
Merci, Mélanie. Tellement ravie que tu co-présides la campagne nationale et avec Navdeep Bains, bien entendu. Late breaking news that came out over the course of this convention that we are also thrilled about. Mary, over to you to address the important issue of what has been done to date and how you're looking to the future.
Well, thank you for that. Congratulations to Mel, and I love that priority. I think we all, well, I know we all share this, and I think I can say, sitting around a table where half of us are women, that the perspective that comes to this, just like the one that Chrystia just shared around the global tables, it really does matter because it comes from a lived perspective. It's those conversations that you're also having with other women leaders, or the woman who is working in whatever the job is, particularly our frontline workers or our small businesses or entrepreneurs. You bring to the table that particular perspective. And what I would also say, because it's liberals who are here, and to the incredible volunteers and everyone who has done your part to help get us here sitting in front of you on this panel. It's your terrific work. And I just want you to think about that work, your work, and what that means to the future of this country and the future of a recovery from this she-cession. Before COVID-19, we made at the very, very heart of our work an inclusive, a path to an inclusive economy that that includes women, 50% of our population, and that includes the range of intersectionalities there as well. So for me, being the small business minister and the international trade minister, I always sort of say, what's my job? My job is start up, scale up, and access new markets for our Canadian businesses. But it can't just be the businesses that have always had the opportunities. It's leading in a very intentional way, leading to make sure that those tools are there, that the investments are there, and that the work and the leadership that it requires, working with a whole coalition, including with people in the private sector, labor, and us in government, to take down those barriers that stop people from trying to get ahead. So when you talk about women, and when I think about whether it's the women entrepreneurship strategy or helping Indigenous businesses grow, or helping Black entrepreneurs, what is the one thing that they've been talking about that eludes their ability to participate or to grow their enterprises, or in fact to get into those global markets? Getting access to capital. So when I said earlier that I think about two numbers, $150 billion and 12 trillion, it's because it is this very intentional leadership that we have taken as a government that really looks at how we create opportunities, remove barriers, make the right investments so that women can participate. Not only do they participate, they lead. And that in the leadership in COVID, that they are supported in that leadership, because it has been really, really hard. So I often talk about, we put forward social policies, but those social policies are really important economic policies for our country. And I would say that we are at a very great and interesting time for Canadians to be, to build back better, to build back resilient, and to build back being competitive on that global stage. Some of the things that we've been doing sort of said, look, we're not going to let COVID-19 stop us from helping small businesses grow and to succeed. So I've been taking virtual trade missions, just like how we're doing this convention virtually. We've been taking virtual trade missions around the world. We've taken them to Asia Pacific. We've taken them to France and to the European Union. We've taken them to, to Mozambique. So we are pursuing and we're pivoting like the way I think our businesses and our entrepreneurs are trying to do across the country. And this is something that has been tremendously exciting to do, not without difficulties, but learning along the way. And all this is to say is that I can't be more proud than I am to be able to sit around this virtual panel with female economic ministers. So not only do we have Mélanie leading the effort in our, in politics and in sort of in that next campaign, but we also have a team of women leaders who are also bringing our lens, and therefore the lens and the voices of women, Canadian women across the country, into this building back of our economy out of this pandemic.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you for all of the work that you've been doing, whether it's with the Women's Entrepreneurship Strategy or these fantastic trade missions with women entrepreneurs. And my next question does look a little bit more to the future. I wonder if you get the sense that Canadians' views and perceptions of the care economy is changing. I'm thinking of the role of nurses, the importance of long-term care workers. I'm thinking, of course, of childcare responsibilities. I hope that maybe the pandemic might be changing our perception of the importance of this work, which has traditionally been taken up by women. What are your views, Chrystia?
I just unmuted myself. Sorry, guys. I think please unmute yourself. We should all have T-shirts that say that, because that is the experience of COVID. It's a great question, Rachel. And I just want to start by picking up on one thing that Mélanie said about the value of having and recruiting women candidates, and also about how hard it is. And as Mélanie said that, I immediately had this flashback to recruiting a wonderful woman candidate called Mary Ng. I think, I don't know, Mary, you'll have to tell people whether this is true or not, but I think the conversation that clinched it was when Mary and I took our shoes off and stood back to back, and I proved to her that we are basically the same height. And I said, look, we do need women around the cabinet table, but also having more short women would be good. And I think that was what won you over, right, Mary? But it was hard. It was really, really hard.
She's taller, by the way, for the record.
I was trying to be gracious, Mary, only like a tiny bit, about like 2 millimeters. Mm-hmm. Anyway, but it was hard to persuade Mary to run. And it was hard to persuade me to run a few years before that. And I do think, I just really want to echo what Mélanie said. I think women, I'm not sure why, we each have our own reasons and situations. We maybe are kind of raised to be a little bit less full of braggadocio. We're a little bit more hesitant to see ourselves in that role. And so I would just say to all the great liberals who are listening to us, please heed Mélanie's call. And if you are a woman and you're thinking of running, give Mélanie a call, or anyone else. And if there's a great woman in your life who you think should run, urge her to do it. So I just couldn't resist. Mélanie inspired me. On the care economy, Rachel, I think that is a very, very important question. And, I think that when it comes to COVID and when it comes to the COVID recession, the way to have the right treatment is to start with the right diagnosis. And one of the things which is so striking about the recession we're experiencing today, or experienced very profoundly last year, is how different it was from previous economic recessions. This was not an economic shock caused by some internal endogenous problem. It was entirely exogenous. Something happened to us that made us shut the economy down. It's more like a flood or a forest fire than a regular recession. And the places where that pain hit were very specific. You know, some parts of the economy actually are doing better than they were this time last year. Other parts have been really, really hard hit. And that shock is very localized, very specific. The recession has hit women, young people, low-waged workers, small and medium-sized businesses, particularly, and the responsible ministers are here, so I see them both nodding their heads, particularly in tourism and hospitality. That is where the hurt has been. And so I think that it's very, very important that our economic response start with that diagnosis. And it's going to have to be very, very carefully focused on healing those wounds, restoring that economic muscle in those places so that Canada can come roaring back. And that's where the care economy definitely comes into the picture, because many of those workers are in that space. And supporting workers in that space is going to be really, really key to Canada's economic rebound. So, to take a point that Mélanie and Diane have talked about, participation of women in the labor force. We've all seen how hard it is, yes, for all parents to participate in the labor force, but the reality is in most families, when there is no childcare, it's the mother who ends up doing that childcare work. It is going to be a generational hit to Canada's economic potential if we can't make it possible for parents, and particularly mothers, who have dropped out of the labor force in much greater numbers than men and than fathers, if we can't make it possible for them to get back to work. And so, that's why I think it's so important to have a focus on early learning and childcare. And, to see it for sure, I think all of us here are feminists. I certainly am, and our Prime Minister is a proud feminist, and that makes such a difference. But early learning and childcare is also an economic policy. It's a real driver of economic growth for everyone. So I think, that is something that we need to be very, very mindful of. And I'm just going to say one final thing on the care economy, Rachel, which is I think that we need to really appreciate, and I do believe, and I hope we don't forget, the extent to which COVID has taught us how dependent we all are on the people who work in the care economy, on nurses, on doctors, on janitors, on cooks, on the people who keep our long-term care facilities running, our hospitals running. They are the people who have literally saved lives and held the hands of our loved ones when we couldn't be there. And I really think that we need to remember how dependent we are on them, and we need to be sure that they have the support and actually the income that they need.
Thank you so much, Chrystia. I think back to Thursday evening and the moment of silence we had at the beginning of the convention. And I was thinking, of course, of the Canadians that have been lost to COVID, but also of all of the sacrifices made by our frontline healthcare workers. So many women I know who are sleeping in their cars because they were nurses in hot zones in COVID wards, and doctors who have not had a vacation in well over a year, in some cases working 24/7. Diane, j'aimerais pouvoir te passer la parole pour aussi pouvoir répondre à cette question très importante. Je ne sais pas si vous avez quelques idées à nous partager.
Oui, merci beaucoup, Rachel. Écoute, je suis tellement d'accord avec tout ce que mes collègues ont dit lors de ce panel. Puis, bien, je peux vous dire aussi, c'est ce qui me... Je ne devrais pas dire ce qui me surprend, mais ce que je constate, puis ce que je continue de constater, parce que je pense que je suis la plus vieille actuellement sur le panel, donc avec une certaine expérience de vie aussi, mais c'est de voir et de constater à quel point les femmes sont résilientes, à quel point les femmes, dans toutes les crises qu'on a vécues, les femmes ont continué là, de prendre soin des gens. Les femmes ont continué d'offrir des services à la population. Les femmes ont continué de supporter leurs familles, de supporter leurs enfants, ont été inquiètes comme aidantes naturelles de ne pas pouvoir aller aider leurs parents. Donc, puis moi, je l'ai vu dans des crises, puis on a la COVID, mais quand on est en région, puis qu'on a vécu des crises économiques, des femmes qui étaient des salaires d'appoint sont devenues le salaire de la famille et ont continué de prendre soin de la santé mentale de tous les gens qui les entouraient. Puis, Chrystia, tu parlais tantôt du mot vigilance et nous devons demeurer vigilants parce que lorsque la crise va se terminer et lorsque la vie va reprendre son cours, la tendance souvent, ce qui nous arrive, c'est qu'on oublie parce qu'on se fait happer par le quotidien. Mais nous devons être vigilantes, nous devons être ambitieux. Puis, pour moi, là, une crise, moi qui suis une ancienne intervenante sociale, une crise, c'est un moment, c'est une opportunité qu'on doit saisir pour pouvoir changer des choses, pour pouvoir faire mieux, pour pouvoir avoir un programme qui est ambitieux. Nous sommes des libéraux progressistes, nous sommes ambitieux de nature. Donc, on doit continuer vraiment là, d'être un outil de changement, d'amélioration, puis avec tous les panels qu'il y a eu en fin de semaine, avec les gens qui se sont impliqués, les gens de partout au Canada, on le voit à quel point vous avez à cœur d'avoir un pays qui va être encore mieux, un Canada qui va être encore meilleur, qui va pouvoir offrir des chances égales auprès des femmes, d'aider les femmes. Puis on parle d'intégration, c'est d'intégrer les femmes retraitées. On va devoir continuer, on peut continuer de travailler, on peut de s'adapter, de travailler avec nos collègues pour avoir des mesures en place, autant pour les retraités, autant pour les personnes handicapées. On a parlé d'immigration aussi, puis de continuer de se poser les vraies questions, puis de faire des choix et de ne pas avoir peur de faire des choix, mais des choix qui vont nous aider à aller vers encore mieux pour l'ensemble de la population. Puis je dois vous dire que pour moi, il en va de l'avenir de tous les Canadiens et les Canadiennes. Donc, faisons de cette COVID un événement malheureux, comme on dit. Si on a eu du citron, faisons de la limonade avec. Donc, soyons positifs pour nos gens, puis on va continuer de travailler de façon acharnée, tous nos collègues autour de la table, puis toutes les femmes là, avec qui je travaille. Fait que pour moi, c'est un baume aussi de voir la jeunesse, puis de voir la place que vous prenez. Donc, c'est rassurant.
Ah oui, absolument. Diane, une intervention tellement touchante et j'aime beaucoup la positivité avec laquelle nous allons clôturer ce panel. Mais pour avoir participé à la commission des jeunes libéraux plutôt lors du congrès, je peux vous confirmer the party is in very good hands. There are a lot of young people that have joined this convention for the very first time, who are going to be volunteers for the very first time. And we are so delighted to welcome them all. As we have said many times during the convention, this is our best attended national convention, and so many new faces have joined us that we are in excellent stead for the next election, whenever it should come. And so thank you all for fabulous women leading the charge on economic portfolios and sharing with us their thoughts on how we can move forward past the She-cession that we have seen develop over the course of this pandemic. Thanks very much to you all, and back to the main stage.